The crack of a wooden gavel shattered the tense silence as Katherine Davis pressed her eyes shut, trying to block out the dozens of leering faces that surrounded her. It was 1873 in Redemption Creek, a dusty mining town in the Arizona Territory, and she stood trembling on an auction block that had been hastily constructed outside the town's only saloon. The sounds of drunken laughter and crude remarks cut through the cool evening air as she fought to maintain what little dignity remained after 3 days locked in a stagecoach storage compartment. $20 for this fine specimen, shouted the auctioneer, a greasy-haired man with tobacco-stained teeth who had introduced himself as Silas Blackwood. Look at that golden hair, gentlemen, and skin as fair as moonlight. Who'll give me 25? Katherine bit her lip until she tasted blood, her wrists raw from the rope that bound them together. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been safely ensconced in her father's Boston home, preparing for her wedding to the son of her father's business partner. Then came the telegram announcing her father's sudden death, followed by the revelation that his shipping business was deeply in debt. The creditors had taken everything, leaving Katherine with nothing but the clothes on her back and a one-way ticket to San Francisco, where her mother's distant cousin had reluctantly agreed to take her in. She never made it past Arizona Territory. The stagecoach had been attacked by bandits who killed the driver and the guard. The other passengers, 2 elderly women and a traveling salesman, had been robbed and left by the roadside, but Katherine had been taken. Now she stood before a crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters, being sold like cattle. $30, called a red-faced miner, eyeing her hungrily. 40, countered a heavy-set man with a filthy beard. Katherine felt her knees weaken. She had heard whispered stories of women being sold to work in the brothels of frontier towns, but never imagined she would face such a fate. Her education, her refined manners, her dreams of a respectable life, none of it mattered now as men bid on her as if she were property. $50, shouted a voice from the back of the crowd. Do I hear 60? Silas prompted, his eyes gleaming with greed. $100, called a quiet but firm voice from the edge of the gathering. The crowd fell silent, parting to reveal a tall figure standing apart from the rest. Unlike the unwashed miners and rough-hewn laborers, this man stood straight-backed and composed. Dust covered his dark clothing and broad-brimmed hat, suggesting he'd been riding hard, but there was a calm dignity about him that set him apart. $100, Silas repeated, clearly delighted by the unexpected sum. Going once, going twice. 200. The man countered his own bid, stepping forward. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Katherine dared to raise her eyes, meeting the gaze of her potential buyer. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear winter sky. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering at her or making crude gestures. Instead, his expression held something she hadn't seen in days: compassion. Sold. Silas brought down his gavel with finality. To the gentleman in black. Relief and terror warred within Katherine as she was roughly pulled from the platform. What fate awaited her now? The man who had purchased her might look more civilized than the others, but appearances could be deceiving. She had heard stories of soft-spoken men who became monsters behind closed doors. The stranger approached, exchanging coins with Silas before turning to Katherine. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, as if concerned that any sudden motion might frighten her further. When he stood before her, she noticed a thin scar that ran along his jawline, partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. "Madam," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "my name is Daniel Reed. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise you this: you'll only know peace now." Katherine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. His eyes held steady, unwavering in their sincerity. "Untie her," he instructed Silas, who grudgingly complied. As the ropes fell away, Katherine rubbed her chafed wrists, wincing at the raw skin. The man named Daniel removed his long duster coat and draped it gently around her shoulders. "My horse is just over there," he said, nodding toward a magnificent chestnut stallion tethered to a hitching post. "Can you walk?" Katherine nodded mutely, still too shocked and wary to speak. She followed him through the dispersing crowd, acutely aware of the disappointed and angry glances from men who had been outbid. When they reached his horse, Daniel pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and offered it to her. "Drink slowly," he advised as she took it with trembling hands. The water was cool and clean, soothing her parched throat. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's expression darkened as he gazed back toward the makeshift auction block. "No person should ever be sold like property. I've seen enough suffering in this world to last 10 lifetimes. He turned back to her. "I have a small ranch about 3 hours' ride from here. You'll be safe there until we can arrange passage to wherever you wish to go." Katherine hesitated, clutching his coat tightly around her. Could she trust this stranger? What choice did she have? "I was headed to San Francisco," she said. "My mother's cousin." "We can send a telegram from the nearest proper town," Daniel assured her. "But first you need rest and proper food." He gestured to his horse. "May I help you up?" After a moment's hesitation, Katherine nodded. Daniel's hands were strong but gentle as he lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Redemption Creek, Katherine felt the tension in her body slowly begin to ease. She didn't know what awaited her at Daniel Reed's ranch, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe she might survive this ordeal. The moon rose high over the desert landscape, casting silver light across the scrubby terrain. Katherine drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the solid presence of the man behind her. Each time she jerked awake, momentarily disoriented and afraid, Daniel would speak softly, reminding her that she was safe. It was well past midnight when they finally approached a modest homestead nestled against a backdrop of low hills. A small but sturdy cabin stood at the center, with a barn and corral nearby. As they drew closer, Katherine could make out a vegetable garden, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be an orchard of young fruit trees. It was a far cry from her father's elegant Boston home, but in the moonlight, it looked like sanctuary. "Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch," Daniel said as he brought the horse to a stop before the cabin. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." The door of the cabin opened, spilling warm lamplight into the yard. An elderly woman with silver hair tied in a neat bun appeared, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Daniel Reed, what in heaven's name? We weren't expecting you back for another week," she exclaimed, hurrying toward them. "Change of plans, Mrs. Holloway," Daniel replied, dismounting before carefully helping Katherine down. "This is Mississippi." He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Katherine," she supplied softly. "Katherine Davis." "Miss Davis needs our help," Daniel continued. "She was being sold at auction in Redemption Creek." Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted from surprise to outrage to compassion in the span of seconds. "Those vile creatures. Well, you're safe now, child. Come inside before you catch your death." Katherine allowed herself to be led into the cabin, which was simple but immaculately kept. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. Mrs. Holloway bustled around, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table and setting a bowl of stew before Katherine. "Eat, dear," she urged. "You look half-starved." As Katherine took her first tentative spoonful, she noticed Daniel watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he nodded slightly before turning to Mrs. Holloway. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "Then I'll sleep in the barn tonight." "Nonsense," Mrs. Holloway replied. You'll take your room. Miss Davis can have the spare bedroom. I changed the linens just yesterday, fortunately. After Daniel left, Mrs. Holloway sat across from Katherine, her kind eyes assessing. He's a good man, she said quietly. One of the best I've known. Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Hasn't been the same since, but his heart's still there. Katherine looked up from her stew, surprised by this personal revelation. Are you his mother? She asked. Mrs. Holloway chuckled. No, dear. I'm his housekeeper, though sometimes I mother him more than he'd like. My husband was the foreman here until he passed 2 winters ago. Daniel insisted I stay on. She reached across the table to pat Katherine's hand. Don't you worry. You're safe here. Later, cleaned up and dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Katherine lay in a soft bed for the first time in days. The room was small but comfortable, with handmade quilts and curtains that stirred gently in the night breeze. She could hear the distant sounds of cattle and the soft hooting of an owl. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the men at the auction, felt the ropes around her wrists. And when she did drift off, she jerked awake from nightmares where she was running, always running, but never escaping. Just before dawn, she gave up on sleep and wrapped herself in a shawl Mrs. Holloway had left for her. Moving quietly, she made her way outside, drawn by the promise of fresh air and open space after days of confinement. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as the first hint of sunrise colored the horizon. Katherine settled on the porch steps, drawing deep breaths of the cool, clean air. The vast openness of the landscape both terrified and exhilarated her. Boston, with its crowded streets and tall buildings, seemed like another world entirely. Couldn't sleep. Katherine startled at the sound of Daniel's voice. He stood a few yards away holding 2 steaming cups. She hadn't heard him approach. I'm sorry, she said, automatically apologetic. I didn't mean to intrude. This is your home for as long as you need it to be, he replied, offering her one of the cups. Coffee? It's strong enough to wake the dead, according to Mrs. Holloway. Katherine accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. Thank you for everything. Daniel settled on the step beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. No need for thanks. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the sun rose over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Katherine felt some of her tension ease with each passing moment. The horrors of the past few days seemed to recede in the face of this peaceful morning. What will you do now? Daniel finally asked. Katherine stared into her coffee cup. I don't know. My father died 2 weeks ago. His business was in debt. I was traveling to San Francisco to stay with a cousin I've never met. She looked up at the vast sky. I don't even know if she'll still take me in. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. You're welcome to stay here until you decide. It's not fancy, but it's safe. Why are you helping me? The question that had been burning in her mind since the auction finally escaped her lips. Daniel was silent for a long moment. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter were traveling to visit her parents in Colorado. Their stagecoach was attacked by raiders. His voice was steady, but Katherine could hear the underlying pain. They were taken. By the time I found them, it was too late. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. I'm so sorry. When I saw you on that auction block, his jaw tightened. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. Not when I could do something about it. The honest admission touched something deep within Katherine. This wasn't charity or some misplaced sense of gallantry. This was a man who understood loss and pain, who recognized it in others. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. Daniel nodded once, then rose to his feet. I need to check the north pasture today. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get your bearings on the land." The invitation surprised her. In Boston, ladies didn't ride out to check pastures. But this wasn't Boston, and Katherine was beginning to understand that surviving here would require adapting to new ways. "I would like that," she replied, finding that she genuinely meant it. An hour later, Katherine was dressed in clothes Mrs. Holloway had altered for her, a simple skirt and blouse that had belonged to Daniel's late wife, Sarah. The older woman had fussed over the fit, promising to make more suitable garments in the coming days. "You're taller than Sarah was, Mrs. Holloway commented as she pinned the hem of the skirt. "And she was covya. Still, we'll make do." Katherine felt strange wearing a dead woman's clothes, but practicality overrode sentimentality. Her own traveling dress was filthy and torn, unsuitable for riding across the ranch. Daniel was waiting in the yard with 2 horses, his own chestnut stallion, and a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "This is Willow," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady and calm. Good for someone who might not have much riding experience." Katherine approached the horse cautiously. "I rode in the park sometimes in Boston, but never like this." "She'll take care of you," Daniel assured her. "Just relax and let her do the work." With his help, Katherine mounted the mare, adjusting her borrowed skirt as best she could. Daniel swung easily onto his own horse, and they set off at a leisurely pace. The ranch was larger than Katherine had initially thought. They rode for nearly an hour, Daniel pointing out landmarks and explaining the operation of the ranch. He ran cattle primarily, but also kept horses, grew crops for feed, and maintained the small orchard she had noticed the night before. "My wife started the orchard," he explained as they passed the rows of young trees. "She said every home should have fruit trees. These will start bearing properly next year, God willing." They continued to the north pasture, where a herd of cattle grazed peacefully. Daniel dismounted to check a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, while Katherine remained on Willow, taking in the breathtaking vista of mountains in the distance. "It's beautiful here," she said when Daniel returned to her side. "So different from Boston." "Take some getting used to," he replied. "The space, the silence. Some folks can't stand it." "I think I could learn to love it," Katherine said, surprising herself with the admission. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and appreciation. "Most city folk find it too quiet, too empty. After the past few days, quiet and empty sounds like paradise," Katherine replied with a small smile. They rode on, stopping by a clear stream where they dismounted to let the horses drink. Daniel spread a blanket on the ground and produced a simple lunch that Mrs. Holloway had packed for them: bread, cheese, and dried fruit. As they ate, Katherine gradually began to share more of her story: her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her father's shipping business, and the arranged marriage that had awaited her before her father's death changed everything. "He wasn't a bad man," she said of her intended husband. "Just uninspiring. We would have had a comfortable life, but not a passionate one." Daniel listened attentively, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing her to speak uninterrupted. When she asked about his life, he spoke of growing up on a farm in Missouri, joining the Union Army during the Civil War, and eventually making his way west with Sarah to start a new life. "We bought this land in '67, he explained. "Built the cabin with our own hands. It was hard work, but we were happy." The way he spoke of his late wife with love and respect rather than overwhelming grief gave Katherine hope that wounds could heal, even the deepest ones. As the days passed, Katherine found herself settling into the rhythm of life at Willow Creek Ranch. Mrs. Holloway taught her to cook over an open hearth, to churn butter, and to preserve the vegetables from the garden. Daniel showed her how to ride properly, how to identify the edible plants that grew wild on the property, and even the basics of handling a firearm, a necessary skill in this untamed territory. A woman alone needs to be able to protect herself, he insisted when she initially balked at the idea of firing a gun. Under his patient instruction, Katherine learned to load and fire a small revolver with reasonable accuracy. The first time she hit the target, a tin can placed on a fence post, she let out a whoop of delight that made Daniel smile more broadly than she had yet seen. They sent a telegram to Katherine's cousin in San Francisco, explaining what had happened and inquiring if the offer of accommodation still stood. The reply, when it finally came, was brief and disheartening. Regret cannot accommodate at this time. Situation changed. Wish you well. Katherine had expected as much, but the confirmation still stung. She had no family left, no home to return to, and limited prospects for a respectable woman alone on the frontier. What will you do? Daniel asked when she showed him the telegram. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and purples. Katherine smoothed the paper on her lap. I don't know. I have no money, no connections here. She looked up at him. I can't impose on your hospitality forever. You're not imposing, Daniel said quietly. You've been helping with the chores, learning the ways of the ranch. Mrs. Holloway says you're a quick study. But I can't stay here indefinitely as your guest, Katherine replied. People will talk. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Would you consider staying as something else? Katherine's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? The ranch needs a woman's touch, he said carefully. And I've grown accustomed to your company. I'm not offering romance, Katherine. I don't know if I have that in me anymore. But I am offering a partnership. A marriage of convenience, if you will. Katherine stared at him, stunned by the unexpected proposal. You want to marry me? I want to offer you a home, he clarified. Security. And yes, my name if you'll have it. In return, you would help run the ranch. Make this place a home again. He met her gaze directly. I won't touch you unless you wish it. You would have your own room, your own privacy. Katherine's mind raced. It wasn't the proposal she had once dreamed of, but it was honest and respectful. And the alternative, trying to make her way alone in this harsh territory, was daunting at best, dangerous at worst. May I have time to think about it? She asked. Daniel nodded. Of course. It's not a decision to make lightly. That night, Katherine lay awake, weighing her options. Daniel Reed was a good man, kind, honorable, and steady. She had come to admire his quiet strength and gentle manner. But marriage? Could she bind herself to a man who admitted he might never love her? Yet as she considered the alternative, seeking work in some frontier town, vulnerable and alone, Daniel's offer seemed increasingly like a lifeline. And perhaps, a small voice whispered in her mind, perhaps with time, something more than friendship might grow between them. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Daniel in the barn, brushing down his horse after an early ride. I've thought about your proposal, she said without preamble. Daniel set down the brush and turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. And I accept, Katherine said, with one condition. Name it. If either of us should find love, real love, we find a way to end this arrangement honorably. She held his gaze. I don't want to trap you, Daniel. And I don't want to be trapped either. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. Though I doubt I'll be the one to invoke that condition. 2 days later, they rode into the nearest town, a small settlement called Copper Springs, where a circuit judge was making his monthly visit. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, witnessed by Mrs. Holloway and the local storekeeper. Katherine wore her best borrowed dress, her hair neatly arranged, while Daniel had shaved and donned a clean shirt for the occasion. As they exchanged simple vows, Katherine felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief, apprehension, and something like hope. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Daniel hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips. It was gentle and fleeting, but Katherine felt an unexpected warmth spread through her at the contact. "Mrs. Reed," he said quietly as they stepped outside the judge's temporary office. The name sounded strange to her ears, but not unpleasant. Their return to the ranch was marked with little fanfare. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a special supper and baked a small cake, but otherwise, life continued much as before. True to his word, Daniel made no demands on Katherine as a wife beyond her contribution to running the household and ranch. They settled into a comfortable routine. During the day, they worked side by side, tending to the animals, maintaining the property, and preparing for the coming winter. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from one of the few books Daniel owned, sometimes simply talking about their days. Katherine discovered that Daniel was more educated than she had initially assumed. He had a keen mind and thoughtful opinions on everything from politics to literature. Their discussions often continued late into the night, neither wanting to break the connection that was gradually forming between them. As autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and changing colors to the landscape, Katherine found herself watching Daniel when he wasn't aware. The way his hands moved as he repaired harnesses or built furniture. The rare smile that transformed his serious face when something amused him. The gentleness he showed to injured animals or frightened foals. She began to wonder what it would be like if theirs were a true marriage, not just a practical arrangement. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset, Daniel broke a comfortable silence. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Marrying me?" Katherine considered the question carefully. "No," she finally answered. "I feel safe here, respected." That's more than many women can say about their marriages. Daniel nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "I want you to be happy, Katherine, not just safe." "I am in many ways," she assured him. "What about you? Do you regret offering me this arrangement?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. Not for a moment. Something shifted between them that night, a subtle change in the air, a new awareness of each other. When Daniel wished her good night outside her bedroom door, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than usual. As winter descended on Willow Creek Ranch, bringing with it howling winds and occasional snow, the inhabitants of the small homestead drew closer together. The cold necessitated sharing space, huddling near the fire in the evenings, working in proximity to conserve warmth during the day. Katherine learned to make candles and soap, to knit by firelight, to preserve meat for the lean months ahead. Daniel taught her to read weather patterns, to recognize the signs of approaching storms, to prepare the ranch for winter's harshest blows. Mrs. Holloway watched their growing closeness with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. She had witnessed the gradual thawing of Daniel's heart, the way his gaze followed Katherine around the room, the small courtesies he extended that went beyond mere politeness. For her part, Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to her husband in ways that had nothing to do with their practical arrangement. She noticed the strength in his shoulders as he chopped wood, the grace in his movements as he worked with the horses, the depth of thought behind his quiet words. The first blizzard of the season hit in early December, confining them to the cabin for 3 days. Mrs. Holloway had gone to visit her sister in Copper Springs the week before, leaving Daniel and Katherine alone for the first time since their marriage. The forced intimacy was both challenging and revealing. They cooked together, cleaned together, and spent long hours talking by the fire as the wind howled outside. Katherine learned more about Daniel's childhood, his experiences during the war, and the dreams he and Sarah had shared for their future. In turn, she opened up about her own past, her distant relationship with her father, her mother's early death, and the loneliness of her privileged but emotionally barren upbringing. On the third night of the blizzard, as they sat close to the fire, Daniel surprised her by reaching for her hand. "I have something for you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. From his pocket, he produced a small wooden carving of a willow tree, exquisitely detailed down to the delicate drooping branches. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, taking the carving carefully in her hands. "Did you make this?" Daniel nodded. "Been working on it in the evenings. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something of your own here." The simple gift touched Katherine deeply. It represented not just Daniel's skill with his hands, but the time and thought he had invested in creating something specifically for her. "Thank you," she said, impulsively leaning forward to press a kiss to his cheek. Daniel caught her face in his hand as she began to pull away, his calloused palm warm against her skin. For a long moment, they stayed frozen in that position, eyes locked, breath mingling in the small space between them. "Katherine," he whispered, her name a question and a plea at once. She answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened as Daniel responded with unexpected passion. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer until she was nestled against his chest, her heart racing in time with his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't expect this," he admitted softly, "to feel this way again." "Neither did I," Katherine replied, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "But I'm glad for it." That night, for the first time, they shared a bed not just as husband and wife in name, but as lovers discovering each other in the most intimate way. Daniel was gentle and patient, guiding Katherine through her initial nervousness with tender care. In his arms, she found a passion she had never imagined possible, a connection that transcended the physical to touch something deeper within her soul. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, the storm still raging outside, Katherine felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, not in a Boston mansion or a San Francisco parlor, but here in this simple cabin with this quiet, honorable man who had saved her in more ways than one. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, not sure if he was still awake to hear it. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever say those words again and mean them." When the storm finally broke, leaving the world outside transformed into a glistening white landscape, Katherine and Daniel emerged from the cabin changed as well. Their practical arrangement had blossomed into something neither had anticipated: a deep, abiding love built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and growing passion. Mrs. Holloway returned a week later, taking one look at the pair of them before breaking into a knowing smile. "Well, it's about time," she declared, hanging up her coat. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." Life at Willow Creek Ranch took on new richness as winter gave way to spring. Katherine and Daniel worked side by side during the day, building and improving their shared home, and spent their nights discovering the depths of their connection. They talked of the future now, making plans for expanding the ranch, perhaps adding a room to the cabin, creating a life together that would honor both their pasts while embracing new possibilities. In late April, as the first wildflowers began to carpet the hills around the ranch, Katherine shared news that brought tears to Daniel's eyes. "A baby," he repeated after she told him, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're certain?" Katherine nodded, her own eyes shining. "Mrs. Holloway confirmed it. She says I'm about 2 months along." Daniel gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious crystal. "I never thought I'd have another chance at fatherhood," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, suddenly anxious. In answer, Daniel lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle, laughing with a joy she had never heard from him before. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he declared, setting her gently back on her feet. "You've given me back my life, Katherine Reed, a future I never thought I'd have." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel's hand resting protectively over Katherine's still flat stomach. The mountains in the distance were bathed in golden light, the air filled with the sweet scent of spring blossoms. "When I saw you on that auction block," Daniel said quietly, "I had no idea I was really saving myself." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "When you said I would only know peace now, did you have any idea how true that would be?" "I hoped," he admitted. "Even then, something about you called to me." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I promise you, Katherine, as long as I live, you'll never know fear or silence again. Only peace. Only love." As darkness fell over Willow Creek Ranch, Katherine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. The tragedy that had uprooted her from her Boston home, the terror of being captured and auctioned, the unexpected salvation in the form of a quiet rancher with sad eyes, all of it had led to this moment of perfect contentment. In Daniel's arms, she had found not just safety, but a love more profound than anything she had ever imagined. And in the child growing within her, there was the promise of a future filled with joy and purpose. The auction block that had once represented her darkest hour had become, through a twist of fate, the first step toward her greatest happiness. And the cowboy who had spoken those kind words, "You'll only know peace now," had become the center of her world, the keeper of her heart, the father of her child. As stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, Katherine offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For Daniel, for their home, for the unexpected gift of a love that had been born in fear and silence but would thrive in peace and joy for all the days to come. By November, Katherine's pregnancy was well advanced, her rounded belly a source of constant wonder to Daniel, who would place his hands on it each evening to feel the vigorous kicks of their active child. Mrs. Holloway had taken to knitting tiny garments and offering advice, some welcome, some decidedly not about childbirth and infant care. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. The cattle herd had increased, the orchard trees were finally bearing significant fruit, and Daniel had added 2 rooms to the cabin, a nursery, and a small study where Katherine could write her increasingly popular stories. She had discovered a talent for storytelling during the long winter evenings, initially writing down tales to entertain Daniel and Mrs. Holloway. On a trip to Copper Springs, Daniel had shown one of her stories to the editor of the small local newspaper, who had immediately offered to publish it. Now her stories of frontier life appeared regularly not just in the Copper Springs Gazette but in papers as far away as Denver and San Francisco. "Who would have thought," Daniel mused one evening as they sat by the fire, "that I would end up married to a famous authoress?" Katherine laughed, setting aside her latest manuscript. "Hardly famous, but it does feel good to earn my own money." She patted her belly. "And to create a legacy for our child." "Speaking of our child," Daniel said, "we should discuss names. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps after your father." Katherine considered this. Despite their complicated relationship, she had loved her father. "William Daniel Reed," she said thoughtfully. "It has a nice ring to it." "And if it's a girl?" Daniel prompted. Katherine smiled. "I was thinking Sarah Elizabeth to honor your first wife and my mother." Daniel's eyes grew misty. "Sarah would have liked that," he said softly. "She would have liked you too. Your strength, your kindness." "I wish I could have known her," Katherine replied honestly. "She must have been remarkable to have earned your love." Daniel reached for her hand. "You're both remarkable in different ways." I'm a fortunate man to have been loved by two extraordinary women in one lifetime. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Visitors were rare at Willow Creek Ranch, especially after dark. Daniel rose, instinctively checking that his revolver was within reach before moving to answer. On the porch stood a rain-soaked figure, a young woman barely out of her teens, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. "Please," she gasped, swaying on her feet. "They said in town you help people, that you saved a woman once." Daniel quickly ushered her inside, calling for Mrs. Holloway. Katherine struggled to her feet, moving as quickly as her pregnant state allowed. "I'm Maria," the woman said, her voice trembling. "This is my son, Thomas. My husband." She faltered. "My husband said he'd kill us both if I didn't obey him. I ran when he passed out drunk." Mrs. Holloway appeared, taking in the situation with one glance before gently relieving Maria of her burden. The infant, barely visible within the swaddling, whimpered softly. "You're safe now," Katherine assured her, guiding the young woman to a chair by the fire. "No one will harm you or your child here." As Mrs. Holloway tended to the baby and Daniel went to prepare the spare room, Katherine sat with Maria, listening to her story of an arranged marriage to a violent man, of abuse and threats, of desperate flight through the night. "I didn't know where else to go," Maria concluded, tears streaming down her face. "Then I heard about you, how a cowboy bought you at auction and gave you a real home instead of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Katherine took the young woman's hands in hers. "You did the right thing coming here. We'll help you start over, just as Daniel helped me." Later that night, after Maria and her son were settled in the spare room, Katherine found Daniel on the porch, staring thoughtfully into the darkness. "What are you thinking?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "I'm thinking that maybe this is our purpose," he replied. "Not just raising cattle or growing crops, but providing sanctuary for those who need it most." Katherine nodded slowly. "A place of peace for those who have known fear. We have the land," Daniel continued, warming to the idea. "We could build more cabins, teach skills, help people become self-sufficient." "A haven," Katherine said, the concept taking shape in her mind. "Willow Creek Haven." Daniel turned to her, his eyes alight with purpose. "Exactly. We've been blessed, Katherine. Maybe it's time to extend that blessing to others." In that moment, as they stood together planning a future that would help heal the broken and protect the vulnerable, Katherine felt a deep contentment settle over her. From the darkest moment of her life had come not just personal happiness, but a mission that would touch countless lives. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, making Katherine gasp and laugh simultaneously. Daniel placed his hand on her belly, feeling their child's restless movements. "Our first Haven resident approves," Katherine said with a smile. 2 weeks later, on a crisp December morning, Katherine gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The labor was long and difficult, leaving her exhausted but triumphant as she held her children for the first time. "William and Sarah," she whispered, gazing down at their tiny, perfect faces. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Daniel, who had refused to leave her side throughout the ordeal, looked utterly overwhelmed by the double blessing. "Twins," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We have twins." Mrs. Holloway, who had assisted the local midwife during the birth, was beside herself with joy. "Just wait until folks in town hear about this," she declared. "The Reed twins will be famous before they're a month old." Maria, who had become an integral part of the household over the preceding weeks, offered to help with the babies, giving Katherine time to rest and recover. The young woman had blossomed in the supportive environment of the ranch, revealing a talent for cooking and a gentle way with animals that made her a valuable addition to their growing family. By spring, the idea of Willow Creek Haven had evolved from concept to reality. Daniel and 2 hired hands built the first additional cabin, and word began to spread about the ranch that offered sanctuary to those in need. A widow and her 3 children arrived in April, followed by an elderly couple who had lost their farm to unscrupulous speculators. Each new arrival brought skills and stories, contributing to the rich tapestry of the community that was forming around the original homestead. Katherine, between caring for the twins and writing her stories, found time to teach reading and basic arithmetic to the children. Daniel, with the help of the men, expanded the agricultural operations to support the growing population. Maria was the first to graduate from the Haven. After 6 months of healing and learning, she secured a position as housekeeper to the new doctor in Copper Springs, taking her son to start a new life with dignity and purpose. She returned often to visit, bringing news from town and small gifts for the twins. As the first anniversary of the twins' birth approached, Katherine sat at her desk one evening, finishing a letter to a publisher in San Francisco who had expressed interest in collecting her stories into a book. The babies were asleep in their cradle. Daniel was making his final rounds of the property, and the Haven was quiet after another productive day. Looking out the window at the community, they had built 5 cabins now surrounding the main house, a communal garden, a schoolroom under construction. Katherine felt a sense of accomplishment that transcended personal happiness. They had created something meaningful, something that would outlast them. Daniel found her there, lost in thought, when he returned from his rounds. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Reed," he said, bending to kiss the top of her head. Katherine smiled up at him. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in 2 years. From that auction block to this." She gestured to encompass their home, their sleeping children, the Haven beyond. "It seems almost impossible." Daniel pulled up a chair beside her, taking her hand in his. "Not impossible, just unlikely. And yet here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, squeezing his hand. "I never imagined I could be this content." "Just content?" Daniel asked with a raised eyebrow. Katherine laughed softly. "Wildly, deliriously happy," she corrected herself. "Completely, utterly in love." "Better? Much better," he approved, leaning in to kiss her properly. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Daniel traced lazy patterns on Katherine's skin, his touch as reverent as it had been the first time. "I've been thinking," he said hesitantly, "about expanding the Haven." Katherine propped herself up on one elbow to see his face better in the moonlight streaming through the window. "In what way?" "There's a property adjacent to ours, the old Simmons place. It's been abandoned since old man Simmons died last year. 200 acres, a decent house, good water." He paused. "I've been saving from the cattle sales. We could afford it." "You want to buy more land?" Katherine asked, trying to follow his thinking. "I want to help more people," Daniel clarified. "The word is spreading about Willow Creek Haven. We get letters every week from folks needing sanctuary. Soon we'll run out of space here." Katherine considered this. It was true that the Haven was growing faster than they had anticipated. The need was greater than they had realized when they started this venture. "It's a big commitment," she said thoughtfully. "More responsibility, more work." "We wouldn't be doing it alone," Daniel reminded her. "Everyone here contributes, and some of those we've helped have moved on to build their own lives, just as Maria did." Katherine nodded slowly. "A network of havens," she mused. "Places of peace throughout the territory." "Exactly," Daniel said, his voice warming with enthusiasm. "What do you think?" Katherine leaned down to kiss him, her heart full of love for this man who had not only saved her, but had joined her in creating something larger than themselves. "I think," she said against his lips, "that you are the most remarkable man I have ever known, Daniel Reed." They sealed their new plan with a kiss that deepened into a more passionate embrace, their bodies speaking the language of love that had grown richer and more nuanced with each passing day of their life together. As dawn broke over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Katherine woke to the sounds of her children stirring in the nursery next door. Rising quietly to avoid waking Daniel, she padded barefoot to tend to the twins, lifting first Sarah and then William from their cradle. As she settled into the rocking chair by the window, a child nestled in each arm, Katherine gazed out at the haven they had created. People were already moving about, beginning their daily chores, feeding animals, fetching water, preparing breakfast. In the distance, she could see the mountains outlined against the brightening sky, steadfast and eternal. 2 years ago, she had stood trembling on an auction block, certain that her life was over. Instead, it had just begun. From that moment of deepest despair had come her greatest joy: a loving husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, and a community built on compassion and second chances. The words Daniel had spoken to her that night still echoed in her heart. "You'll only know peace now." A promise kept, a prophecy fulfilled, a life transformed by a single act of kindness. As the sun rose fully over Willow Creek Haven, Katherine Reed offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home.